Good evening, everyone. My name's Kamal Ahmed. I'm the Executive Editor News of The Observer, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here tonight in what is a pretty unique event organised by Amnesty. Amnesty and The Observer obviously go back an awfully long way, well beyond the memory of probably most of us here, but it was 45 years ago that Peter Benenson wrote in The Observer the words that launched Amnesty as a campaigning organisation. And he said, "Open your newspaper any day of the week and you will find a report from somewhere in the world of someone being imprisoned, tortured or executed because his opinions or religion are unacceptable to his government." Now, when The Observer relaunched as a Berliner-side newspaper, halfway between broadsheet and tabloid, January 2006, we were very keen to mark the fact that we were still The Observer. And the one organisation we wanted to mark that with was Amnesty, for obvious reasons, given our history with the organisation. And we had a brilliant number of discussions with Amnesty about how we could modernise that message for the new world that we lived in. And it was out of those discussions and things that Amnesty were already working on and thinking about that this whole notion of the irrepressible campaign came about. And we were very proud to launch the campaign in May of last year with an article by Kate Allen, which I think really brought back the idea of why the whole notion of amnesty and campaigning for freedom of expression was again being reinvigorated, not so much maybe for what people were saying in speeches, but for what people were trying to do with the internet. And Kate wrote an opening article on the 28th of May last year, trying to explain and modernise the message of what Amnesty is about and why that message is more important now than in the past, because of the internet's great power in giving people freedom, but also the great power that that puts in the hands of those who want to curtail that freedom and stop people being able to say what they want to say and argue about what they want to argue. And so the irrepressible campaign was launched. The point that Kate made in her piece was that governments still fear dissenting opinion, and that they will still try and shut it down wherever they can. And the new technology, as well as helping freedom, was also giving new powers to those that wanted to curtail that freedom, and that we had to be aware of that and campaign on those issues. And it wasn't just maybe the obvious countries that we were talking about. Of course, China, everyone in this room will know about the problems with their internet coverage there and what was going on there. But I think the campaign and what Amnesty have done has shown that those countries go wider, whether it's Iran or Turkmenistan, Tunisia, Israel, the Maldives, Vietnam, wherever governments existed that wanted to curtail the right of their own citizens to say what they wanted to say, Irrepressible wanted to be campaigning and putting pressure on those countries. Now, of course, any campaign is only as good as the effects it has. There's no point in just shouting into a hurricane and getting nowhere. But I think what has shown this campaign is a new type of campaign and a partnership campaign between a media organisation, which obviously through ourselves, The Observer, but also Guardian Unlimited, the great reach that Guardian Unlimited has across the world, and of course the huge power of Amnesty itself has shown how a partnership campaign of this type, which wasn't just a 3-week, 6-week, 2-month sort of flash in the pan, let's just do this for a bit, but is a long-term commitment from us as an organisation to what Amnesty are trying to do. This is the year on, and this doesn't mean this is the end of it. This is not a stopping point. Sorry, this is not an end. This is just simply a stopping point along a long journey. And The Observer is committed, open-ended, to this campaign for, as long as there are people being censored, which is probably going to be, for as long as we'll all be fighting on these type of issues. So I think it was a new type of campaign, which I think was very, very important. 68,500, just before I came out tonight, I looked at the irrepressible.info website. 68,500 people have now signed up to campaign on this specific issue through the Amnesty site, which I think is a fantastic response. That website is about to be relaunched. Tonight's event is part of that, to get that website relaunched and to get more people engaged in the debate. The issue has been hugely debated in America. I think it has created a debate, obviously, here and in Europe, and as well across the other side of the Atlantic. And I think it has brought some engagement. I wouldn't want to overplay this, but it has brought some engagement from the companies that have been accused of colluding in this censorship. Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, I think Google in particular, have made some attempts to engage with this debate and see it as a very damaging part of criticism that's made against them about what they're trying to do. They're the open, colourful, nice organisation, and they don't want to be stained with claims of collusion in censorship. And I think that has helped get it onto their agenda. They've engaged with it more. They've had to, been forced to engage with it more than they have in the past. So for those reasons, I think we can say that 1 year on, we're in a very, very good position. But this, as I say, is just a stopping point in a kind of huge and long and complex journey. Last weekend, just to show exactly at a very individual level, which is absolutely the most important thing about what we're trying to do here. Last weekend, we wrote in The Observer about the case of Ali Saeed al-Shihabi, the Syrian dissident who was in prison for expressing his beliefs. And he wrote on his release about the Amnesty International campaign supported by us that this always made me stronger. I no longer felt that I had been a mere straw in the wind. And if people like that are saying things like that, then I think it kind of behoves us all to keep this kind of battle alive and to support what Amnesty is doing. I just want to say a couple of brief thank yous just before I hand over to the chair of the event. Particularly, obviously, to Amnesty themselves, lots and lots of people from Amnesty, but in particular, Steve Ballinger and Nick Dearden, not only for their original engagement with the whole idea of doing this and their initial thoughts on it, but also for the energy with which they put into this for the whole year. We have written 27 articles on the issue of irrepressible in the year, The Observer, and that's been largely driven by what Steve and Nick have done. I'm going to have to ask for a little bit of patience. This is a unique event which Amnesty have put together, which is a lot of technical complexities and a lot of people far brainier than I getting all this stuff live webcast around the world. So if there are some glitches, and I'm sure there will be, it's quite a long event, hopefully you'll bear with us. I also want to thank, from our side, Sarah Rhodes and Thea Skelton, who are from our marketing arm, who have supported this event and have helped put it together. And I want to give particular thanks to David Smith, who's our technology correspondent, who has written I think all of those articles in The Observer for just kind of driving along and keeping the thing bubbling in, we have over 1 million readers on the print product every weekend, and it's just important to keep this message in front of people and saying that it's not going to go away. And it must be, and journalism often does rather overblown cliches, but it must be one of the most important issues in this century about allowing the internet to develop and allowing the people, the citizens, to use it as they see fit, and not governments to use it as they want to try and stop us saying what we want to say. So thanks very much for coming. I'm going to hand on to Clark Boyd, who's going to chair this, the BBC's technology correspondent. And I just want to say that it's been a real pleasure and pride for The Observer, given our history, given Amnesty, to be supporters of the event. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kamal, for that. I, too, am honored to be a part of this. When you need to know where the fire doors are and where the toilets are, the BBC is the place to call. So that's why I'm here, first of all, to tell you that the fire doors are back here or right out here. I'm also here to tell you that the toilets are right out these red doors, but I've been told that if you go out during the event, you won't be let back in. So cross your legs. And turn your mobile phones off, please. This is going on. This is going out all over the world as a webcast, and we'd really appreciate it if you turned your mobile phones off, especially as far as the speakers are concerned as well. Let's see what else. If you can hold your questions until the end, please, that would be great. We've got a nice chunk of time at the end for debate, so if you want to hold your questions until then, that'd be good. And for those of us joining us via webcast, if you want to go ahead and start sending your questions now, that would be good. I just want to say a couple of brief things before I turn it over to our keynote speaker. I've been covering internet censorship for the last 4 years. It's one of the biggest stories that I cover. It's this great intersection of politics, society, culture, and for somebody who doesn't do a lot of reporting on gadgets and gizmos, it's a great story. And so that's the team, the group of people that have been assembled here tonight are fantastic. I've spoken to a lot of them. I've interviewed some of them, and it's great to have them all in one place at one time. My job is basically to stay out of these people's way as much as possible. So that's what I'm going to try to do. Let me start by introducing our keynote speaker, Martha Lane Fox, probably one of the bigger, if not biggest names in British internet entrepreneurship, co-founder of lastminute.com, co-founded in 1998. And I believe it went public in March of 2000, and she remained on the board until the company was purchased in 2005. She is currently the non-executive director of Marks & Spencer and Channel 4 Television, but she also does a lot of strong advocacy for progressive causes, such as Reprieve and CamFed. So Martha, take it away.
I won't talk for long because I always fall over, so you'll be relieved to hear that. I'm really privileged to speak today and humbled by some of the other people that will be talking. And I was trying to think, how can I link my own experiences to this very important subject? And I often find myself these days being referred to as a bit of a dot-com dinosaur. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, I can't believe it's 10 years ago at the end of this year that we started lastminute.com. And I was thinking it's quite important to maybe think back to what the environment was like then and some of the things that made us feel so energized to be working in the internet, and therefore why it's so important to keep preserving it. So there are 3 reasons that I was thinking that made me feel very energized every day. I jumped out of bed for lastminute.com. The first one, I guess, was the global potential of the web. And a story that I heard really early on in my days in the internet always made me think about how incredible it was that this was a network that really could speak across countries. And it was an anecdote from my consulting days about some Korean school kids that had cottoned on to the fact that they were not only a lot brighter than the school kids in many other bits of the world, but also suffered or benefited from a time delay. And they had offered their services, particularly to children in Australia who were doing similar but more basic coursework to them. And they would send questions to these children in Korea, who would then post the answers overnight back to them on the internet. And these children in Australia were suddenly getting phenomenally good results in their schools. And I always thought that's very enterprising on many levels. And really, that early story about the global potential of the web stuck with me for a long time. The second thing that the web is absolutely about is disruption. And I think that probably lastminute.com knows quite a lot about that. You know, we were quite disruptive in a small sphere, the travel industry, but we certainly struggled to make ourselves known and to change the dynamics of that particular industry. You know, when we started out, the process of buying a ticket at short notice was pretty complicated. Either you had to go and sit for hours in a travel agent on your high street, or you'd have to make a telephone call and spend hours on the telephone, ringing availability for different hotels, all of these things. So we were trying to disrupt in a small way the travel industry. On a perhaps more grandiose level, there were amazing companies doing disruptive things back in '97. You know, Yahoo was disrupting the way that you looked for information. Amazon was completely disrupting the way that you bought books. And it was a very exciting time. And I think that disruption is something that we shouldn't forget was one of the reasons that a lot of people like me were attracted to the internet in its early days. The final thing that I feel very passionate about is innovation. And the web came out of many people innovating on many different levels and spheres. And it's very important, I think, for a healthy and diverse and exciting economy, but society more importantly, that we encourage innovation, that we encourage young people, that we encourage people with crazy ideas. We haven't been very good at it historically here in the UK. We've been quite good at having ideas, but very bad at commercialising them. But I think that that's improving slowly. But the thing that I took most pleasure in at lastminute.com was the technology team. It was really Brent's baby, my co-founder, but actually the thing where the most amazing magic happened. And quite often you walk around late at night and there would be these guys sitting at their desks doing incomprehensible and incomparable code, and we'd walk around and then suddenly some incredible new piece of functionality would appear on the site. It was always those bits of magic and those bits of innovation that really made it feel all worthwhile and exciting. So those things were very, very important to us in those early days. The global potential of the web, the disruptive nature of it, and its innovation and encouraging that innovation. 10 years on, not so much has changed, but I think the thing that has happened, perhaps in a different way to how certainly I anticipated back in 97, is really the power of the individual. You know, even with lastminute.com, it was basically a broadcast from us to our customers. You know, buy these products, they're cheap. Even now, if you were starting an e-commerce site, it's different. The power lies much more with the user, which is a very interesting and exciting, if subtle, shift. And I think this is happening on 3 different levels, really. It's happening on the social level. If I look at my friends now in London, there's really no shame in going onto any number of dating websites, My Single Friend, to name but one, and to be able to plug into networks that maybe you can't build in the real world as easily as you can online. There's many, many sites that all of you will be familiar, Bebo, MySpace, Facebook, hundreds of different sites now that are building social networks in different ways, but all of them giving the power back to the user. The second area is corporates, users versus corporations. And this is an area that I think is hugely important and just beginning. Now when I go on to lastminute.com to book a hotel, although I trust the judgment of that fabulous company 90%, I also go on to TripAdvisor and I see what real users have said about the hotel, and I'm looking at real pictures of that hotel, and that's a big shift. It means that you can't really believe the marketing hype of businesses anymore. There's real potential for individuals to tell you the truth about what corporations are telling you, and that's only beginning to be tapped into, I think. The final sphere is politically. And, you know, this has been happening in a more advanced way, I think, in the US for a long time, with sites like the Huffington Post really beginning now to set the political agenda. But even here, you know, just this morning I signed up to another e-petition. I think Downing Street must be getting sick of seeing my name on all these different e-petitions. But that's a very powerful tool. And again, being able to mass together like-minded groups of interest, just as this campaign has done, and effectively have a voice, is a way that I think maybe back in 97 we'd underestimated how much and how often this would be used. So the landscape certainly looks a bit different to 97. Things always turn out slightly more interestingly than you imagine. But the fundamentals are still there, that the tool that is the internet is incredible and powerful, and the stats just continue to blow me away. You know, there are 196 million registered users for Skype, an internet telephony technology. And I only mention that because that's still a relatively geeky product, and yet 196 million people are using it every single day. 24% of all shopping last Christmas was done online. And there are now more people watching things via the web than there are watching television around the world. And that statistic continues to amaze me. I find it extraordinary that just today I can sit down at my computer, open it up, read all the news that I want to online. I can see blogs, I can see broadsheets, I can see Google alerts, I can get all of this information delivered in the way that I would like it. I can then go and do all my shopping. As you can see with a stick, it's not easy to be in shops, so I do all my grocery shopping, all my pharmaceutical shopping, everything. I then actually went to Walking Sticks to You, my new favourite site, picked up a rather snazzy new walking stick. Then I closed down all the shopping and I did a bit of research for my boyfriend, who's a very keen fisherman, about what the weather's going to be like when he goes up to fish in a river in Scotland next weekend. Then I looked at my godson on YouTube dancing, which had been posted by his mother and father last night. This is all absolutely real. I thought, I must tell you this because it still continues to astonish me. Then I signed up a campaign that my father had sent me to keep classics alive in schools, which is a subject he's very close to and what I studied myself. Then I went on channel4.com and read about what was happening. I'm on the board with the Diana programme that we're screening tonight. And then I came and I made some notes about my talk this evening and looked up some stats online. And then I sat back and I thought, you know, that's really all I maybe need to tell you, that I, one person, can do all those things in the space of a few hours and have my life completely transformed, quite apart from the fact that I feel like I benefit from the web in a way that, you know, many, many, many people would never have imagined possible, both financially and, you know, professionally and so on. But just the daily impact still continues to astound me. And if for no other reason, that is something worth protecting. Of course, freedom of expression and all of the other important human rights issues should be layered on top of that. But at the very basic level, I feel so honoured to have had that and those technologies in my life. And that's something that I think we should all be optimistic about, and we should all continue to battle for everybody around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martha, for that. I want to move on now to Ron Diebert, who is the professor of political, is a professor of political science and director of the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto. The Citizen Lab is a very interesting project. It works at the intersection of the internet and global politics. He's also the co-founder and a principal investigator for something called the Open Net Initiative. And if you follow internet censorship, I'm sure you've heard of the Open Net Initiative. It's a collaboration between or among University of Toronto, Harvard, Oxford, and Cambridge. And they recently released a report on internet censorship worldwide. So I think, Ron, it's great to be able to turn to you virtually to tell us and give us a sense of where things stand right now around the world when it comes to internet repression.
Okay. Can you hear me all? Hello?
Hi, Ron, you there?
Well, I'm assuming you can hear me fine. Clark, I could hear you, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this event. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. As Clark mentions, I'm one of the principal investigators of the Open Net Initiative project. I'm going to explain a bit about the project and how it works, and then get into some of the results of our recent research that Clark mentioned. The Open Net Initiative is a collaboration among 4 universities, the Citizen Lab here at the University of Toronto, Harvard Law School, Cambridge, and Oxford, as well as dozens of non-governmental organizations and individuals worldwide. Our aim is to document patterns of internet censorship and surveillance worldwide, and we have been testing since 2002 using methods that are a combination of contextual research undertaken by people who live within the countries that we're investigating and understand the local context very well as a suite of advanced network interrogation tools that essentially tap the internet from within these countries and give us a picture of what is going on beneath the surface that might not be apparent to the average user. Last year was our first global survey. We conducted tests and did research in 41 countries worldwide. And the summary reports of those 41 countries plus 8 regional reviews can all be found on our website at opennet.net. Well, what do we make of what we found? I can say with confidence that the picture is rather troublesome. The conclusion of the tests, in my mind, show without doubt that the scope, scale, and sophistication of internet content filtering and surveillance practices are growing worldwide. Just to give you some indication, when we started our research in 2002, there were really only 3, maybe 4 countries that were known to engage in internet content filtering. In our research last year and earlier this year, we found evidence of filtering in 25 of the 41 countries that we tested in. And of course, there could be other countries not included in our testing that are filtering as well. So just in a short span of 4 years, there's been a rather dramatic increase in the number of states that are engaged in these type of practices. Of the 25 that were found to engage in internet content filtering, 6 were found to be what we call pervasive filters of internet content, and this would include Burma, China, Iran, Syria, Tunisia, and Vietnam. If you include substantial filters of internet content, those that block a medium degree of internet content according to our testing list, the number goes up to 10 and includes Uzbekistan, Ethiopia, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. So the number of countries engaging in internet censorship is growing worldwide. And of course, one would have to include countries outside of the developing world, countries in the northern industrialized territories, let's call it, that engage in internet content filtering practices, but usually within the framework of the rule of law or in private environments, such as in businesses. And there are a whole host of issues around that as well. The internet censorship practices are growing in terms of sophistication as well. And there are a number of different indicators of this that I would point out. First is that the range of content and topics and internet services that are being targeted for filtering is increasing. When we started out, most countries either justified their filtering or targeted their filtering mostly at pornography or culturally sensitive material. Now they're blocking access to a much wider swath of information, human rights information, like Amnesty International sites or Human Rights Watch sites, independent media and news sites, opposition websites, ethnic minority and independence movements and secessionist movements. They're targeting blogs and blogging services. For example, we found that in Pakistan, all of Blogspot, the entire blogging service, is blocked in its entirety. They're blocking streaming media services like YouTube. There have been recent reports about this as well. And they're blocking in local languages. In other words, they're not just blocking access to content in English, they're blocking access to content that hits most directly to home. In other words, independent human rights information, news information, or information that's coming from political opposition groups in local languages in each of these countries concerned. I would say that there is increasing sophistication as well, as evidenced by the use of commercial filtering products used to block access to information. And here I think while the large internet companies tend to elicit a lot of controversy, and I'm thinking about Google and Microsoft and so forth, what our research revealed was, in fact, the use of commercial filtering products by smaller companies that don't often garner the same level of controversy. For example, we found the U.S. commercial filtering product Smart Filter, used in Tunisia, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Sudan, and by some internet service providers in Iran. The U.S. product Fortinet is used in Burma, and the U.S. product WebSense is used in Yemen. While these companies don't often get the same level of attention as do these other larger ones, they are really instrumental in terms of blocking access to information and are helping to provide a new level of service to countries that essentially violate human rights in terms of access to information. One of the troubling areas that we've discovered in our research that's becoming more prevalent is the use of what we call just-in-time filtering methods. These are methods where authorities leave the internet unfettered, leave it open for the most part of the time, except around special events, like, say, elections, where they slowly turn the tap off. And they do this using methods that make it difficult to determine where the source of the problem is coming from. In other words, it allows for plausible deniability while achieving essentially the same effect. For example, in Kyrgyzstan, opposition newspaper websites and the servers that hosted them came under denial of service attack. We couldn't trace the origin of these attacks, but they seemed to point back to authorities because they were happening at a critical point during the elections. The same thing happened in Belarus in 2005. In Cambodia, just recently, there were news reports of authorities shutting off access to SMS over cellular networks during a period of time leading up to the elections. Now, one of the interesting things about this type of just-in-time filtering is that it's offensive rather than passive interception in terms of the methods used to block access to information. And in light of what has gone on in Estonia over the last few weeks, and in light of what we know about Russian, Chinese, and American doctrines of cyber warfare, the prospect of an arms race in cyberspace, I think, is very real and very serious and has to be taken into account. Well, what does all of this mean? What are the implications and what can be done? I think the bottom line for me personally is that we can no longer take the internet for granted as an infrastructure that supports basic human rights. I think there was a long period of time when we just assumed that the internet had some mysterious magical properties that supported freedom of speech online, that helped people evade censorship. I think what's happening now is that states are actively intervening in the internet environment. It's being carved up, colonized, and militarized. And as a result of that, the architecture of the internet is going to change unless citizens who want to preserve and protect it as a forum for access to information and freedom of speech take concerted efforts. And I think those concerted efforts can come at a variety of levels. One would be to build tools that help preserve the internet as an open architecture. And I would point to one of our own tools that we recently developed here at the Citizen Lab called Siphon that helps people get around internet censorship. I think we also need to push for accountability, transparency, and the rule of law among countries where it is absent in terms of internet censorship and surveillance practices. That would at least be a first step to hold governments accountable, to hold corporations accountable for what they're doing in this area. There's far too much deceit and far too much secrecy around internet censorship and surveillance practices. And lastly, I think we need to raise awareness. We need to make people aware that what happens to their information when they make a request for a website or when they send an email is not something magical. It just doesn't fire off into the ether. It travels down physical lines through routers and choke points all along the line that provide opportunities for authorities to intervene, to intercept and monitor communications. And I think this is where efforts like what Amnesty International is doing with its irrepressible information campaign is so important. We need to make citizens aware that we can't take the internet for granted, that we need to actively preserve it as an open forum of global communications. Thank you very much.
Ron, thanks a lot for that. That was a great overview, and a lot of what Ron talked about just then we're going to get down into more detail on as we go through this evening. And one of the more compelling aspects of this story, at least in the coverage that I've done, has been talking about the human cost of this, that there are real people around the world who are being imprisoned, being tortured, because they're saying things online that governments don't want them to. We want to get into this now, and we want to start with Sami Ben Gharbia, who is from one of the countries that Ron mentioned, Tunisia, but he now lives in the Netherlands as a political refugee. He's the author of a blog called Fikra, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, which means idea in Arabic. Fikra is censored in Tunisia, as are many websites. He's also advocacy director at Global Voices, which is a great website that brings together blogs from around the world. So, Sami, take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I would like first to apologize for my English, which is a bit lost between Dutch and French, so I do my best to speak it well. I do not think that the Internet is a bad thing. Personally, it is thanks to the Internet that I'm here. It is thanks to the Internet that I got asylum in the Netherlands. And it is thanks to the Internet that I am working for Global Voices. But I do think that the Internet is a bad thing for two groups. The first one is composed of countries engaged in Internet censorship. And I think it is the most dangerous group because its members, the enemy of the Internet, are controlling the legislative and the executive and the judicial power. And they are using moral, ideological, and nationalistic and religious justification and excuse to muzzle the freedom of expression in Internet. And unfortunately, they are backed by multinational internet company and local internet service provider who are helping them to achieving this goal. The internet is a bad thing for them because they are realizing that they are losing control of the information and they are trying to restrict its use, preventing millions of web pages from reaching the country's cyberspace and spending millions of dollars to control space submerged by bloggers, web community, and internet users. And I think that each new development in the new information technology and each new easy-to-use tools that is being celebrated by netizens is making much more difficult for those who are thinking that the internet is a bad thing. And it should be filtered and moderated. Video sharing sites like YouTube, Dailymotion, Google Video are being blocked in countries like Morocco, Tunisia, Iran, Pakistan, Thailand, India. Photo sharing sites like Flickr are being blocked in countries like Iran and United Arab Emirates. Search engines are being filtered or simply blocked in countries like China. Online maps like Google Earth and Google Maps are being blocked or photoshopped in countries like Israel, Bahrain, and Morocco. Blogging platforms like blogger.com or LiveJournal are being blocked in countries like Pakistan, Ethiopia, Morocco, Syria, and threatened to be blocked in Fiji, where they are deemed to be a threat to the national security by the military forces. Emails are being intercepted and scanned. Even SMS are being blocked during election in countries like Iran and Ethiopia. And to circumvent this tool and bypass the block, users need both courage and technical knowledge. Unfortunately, average internet users don't have the activist and the technical skill, but they do have fear of being watched and persecuted, fear of being jailed and tortured. And I'm going here to talk about those victims, the second group who are, I think, thinking that the internet is bad in a way. The members of the second group are the most vulnerable party in the equation because they are powerless and isolated individuals confronting a powerful machine. And I will start with Tunisia, my country, where the internet was a bad thing for the cyber dissident Zuhair Yahyawi, who spent 1.5 years in prison. The crime of Zuhair is to run a poll in his site asking the visitor whether Tunisia was a kingdom, a republic, a zoo, or a prison. Yeah, Zuhair was funny and very cynical and provocative, and the answer of the regime was prison. Zuhair got in jail. He spent 1.5 years in jail, and he was dead 18 months after his release from prison. The internet is also a bad thing for a group of Zerzi's 6 cyber dissidents in Tunisia who have been sentenced to heavy prison sentence for visiting blogged websites. They are 20 years old and they were sentenced to 20 years in prison. They were released in 2006 after a local and international campaign. The internet is also a bad thing for the youth of KEF, a group of 3 pupils who were criminal for downloading a song. It's incredible, but these guys were downloading an MP3 hip-hop song criticizing the brutality of the Tunisian police, and they were captured and sentenced. The internet is also a bad thing for the Tunisian prisoner Ramzi Batibi, who is arrested at the internet cafe where he worked. Ramzi sentenced to 4-year imprisonment for republishing a statement made by a terror group threatening to commit a terror attack if the former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon of Israel attended the Summit of International Society in Tunisia. It is also a bad thing for the Tunisian journalist and blogger Slim Boukhdir, who is continuously being harassed and assaulted by both plainclothes police and gangsters close to the family of the wife of the President Ben Ali. Slim was blogging about the responsibility of Tunisia's First Lady brother, Hossam Trabilsi, in the deadly concert stampede in Sfax, in which 7 young people were killed. And the internet is also a bad thing for the Tunisian journalist and blogger Mohammed Fourati, who has been in jail, who has not been in jail, who has been condemned in absentia to 13-month prison term because of 2 articles he wrote online. In other countries in Syria, where the most blogged sites are related to freedom of expression, human rights, ethnic minority, and opposition, on January 2007, the cyber dissident Ali Said al-Shihabi has been released after spending 5 months in detention. He was arrested for articles he wrote online, but 2 other activists still in jail, Muhannad Abdulrahman and Habib Salah. And last year, Rukana Hamour, a Syrian blogger, mother of 3 kids, was taken from her home, dragged into the street after being threatened at gunpoint in front of her young children by security force. Her claim was blogging against the corruption. In Malaysia, 2 prominent bloggers, Khairuddin Attan and Jeff Oy, are facing a lawsuit for posts and comments published by others on their blog. In Egypt, the blogger Abdel Monam Mahmoud, a young activist from the Muslim Brotherhood, who has been arrested in April 2007 and released last Saturday. His crime reporting on torture and using blog as tools against transferring of civilians to the military tribunal. The internet is also a bad thing for the 22-year-old blogger Karim Amr, who is in jail for blogging against President Hosni Mubarak and Islam. In Fiji, the internet was also a bad thing for a prominent businessman arrested and released after 24 hours of custody because the Fijian military forces suspected him of being an anti-military blogger. And the Army Land Force commander is threatening to arrest 20 people who are linked to this freedom blogger in Fiji. And they are threatening to block the whole blogspot.com platform. In China, where 50 cyber dissidents are imprisoned for posting on the internet, another cyber dissident, Hai Long, member of the independent Chinese Pen Center, was sentenced to 6 years in prison. And here I would like to finish with a comparison between the anti-personal landmine that are being disseminated in country and war zone and between the filtering software. And I think that filtering software that are being designed and made available for undemocratic regime by Western company are like this anti-personal landmine, explosive device used to destroy our freedom to speech. And I think the victims that I've mentioned today are those who are risking their life and safety to clear this path to freedom. And the battle for freedom has another front, a much easier one. It is here in the West that we have to fight against those companies who are designing these softwares. Thank you very much.
Sami, thanks for that. We also have with us tonight Sina Motalebe, who is originally from Iran. And he is now with the Persian section at the World Service. Sina, I know we've talked before, and I just wanted to ask you to share a little bit about your story, about why you had to leave Iran and how you ended up here. Yeah, you don't have to, you can sit there.
Hello. I'm Sina Motalebe, Iranian journalist and former blogger. 3 years ago, in April 5 years ago, I lost time. One day before I became 30 years old, I was arrested by Iranian government. Before that, for 5 months, I was interrogated, summoned to the court, and I was afraid to mention it in my weblog because the government told me that this procedure is secret and I don't have any right to write about it in my weblog. Then I was arrested and I spent 23 days in solitary cell, and I spent most of the time blindfolded under very severe psychological pressures, and I don't know, maybe I was too weak, but after 3 weeks in prison, I lost my psychological stability. I heard unreal voices, and I had these conflicting ideas and illusions in my head. Sometimes in the cell, I was interrogating myself inside my head, and then my conscience came back and I said, okay, no, this is not true. This is what interrogators want me to believe. And I was interrogated about every word of every post in my weblog. So after 5 years, I cannot tell you that what was the real reason of my arrest. I don't know which post was the reason, official reason of my arrest. I really don't know that. The only thing they told me when I was in prison, when I was in cell, I was blindfolded and I was interrogated by the head interrogator, who I never saw him. And he told me that I have written in my weblog that blogging is a free way for expressing your views and beliefs without any cost, without any need to technical knowledge or financial power or things like that. And he told me that we want to prove that you are wrong. There are severe costs, there are very high costs in blogging, and we want to make you an example of that. So, yes, we cannot go and trace every single blogger who criticizes our government, but we can scare them out. And I think if you look at Iranian blogosphere today, it's still live, and it has not worked out. But in some way, they were relatively more successful with moderate, ordinary people, because moderate people, average users, they are not willing and they are not ready to pay high costs. They don't want to risk their lives and risk the life of their family on writing on the web. In my case, they not only arrested me, but 1 year after I was released, when I left the country, when I was living in Netherlands, I sought asylum in Netherlands, they arrested my father and kept him in jail for 10 days. And that was when I thought I cannot pay this cost. I can accept whatever they want to do with me, but I cannot put this burden on my family. And there are many, many people like me who have moderate views, who are not fighters, who love freedom and want to resist against censorship, but they don't want to put their families in the risk. And they are scared out, and the field is now open to more extreme views. The higher the costs go, the more moderate people are scared out, and this is the case with Iranian cyberspace, I think, today, that it is the voice of extremists is louder and clearer than ordinary people. And Internet is about ordinary people. Internet is about average users, because this is the difference between this medium and any other traditional media. It is the place you can hear the voice of ordinary average users, and the Iranian government or other governments who put this pressure on online journalism and online users, they scared these people out and give the field to extremists of both sides. And I think the average users also have the problem now of finding reliable information on the net, because if you go to the cyberspace, there are lots of websites with different views, An average user has no tool to examine which website is reliable and which is not. And there are many websites backed by the government spreading rumors, false information. And there are some extreme radical websites outside the country who want to spread any fact that help their political agenda. And I think today it is important that we not only condemn every single arrest in countries like Iran. We not only fight against the censorship and blocking, but also we raise the awareness about media literacy, about the role of media, and give information and knowledge to ordinary people and average users, how they can find reliable information in this exciting field for information, and also this field full of mine, as Sami put it. Thank you. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Sina has something else to say. If you can bring his mic back up, that'd be great.
I told this once before. I was accused and I was charged because they said I have relations with foreigners. Now I'm here in London with foreigners and I cannot communicate with you because of language problem. So, sorry, because of my language.
I think you communicated it quite well. Do we have Josh?
Yeah,
okay, we do. Well, as going back to what Ron said, Ron Diebert said in his talk, that this isn't just developing nations. This is also something that people in the West, bloggers in the West, internet users in the West should be worried about as well. And we have on the line with us Josh Wolf, who is a good example of somebody in the West who should be worried about this. He's an American video blogger. He was jailed on August 1st, 2006 for refusing to turn over videotapes he made during a 2005 anti-G8 demo. He served more than 220 days in federal prison in the United States, and he was just released in April this year. Josh, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Josh, maybe you can tell people, start off by just maybe explaining a little bit more about your case.
Well, my blog is called The Revolution Will Be Televised. It's mostly a video blog, and I went out to film the G8 protest that was occurring in San Francisco a couple years back. It was against the G8 that was going on in Gleneagle, Scotland. During that night's protest, there was a police officer that was injured. I was nowhere near that police officer, and as a result of this altercation, the FBI, the national police, became involved in the investigation. I had a visit by them where they asked for me to provide my video to the government. I cited journalistic privilege issues and said that I wouldn't be able to do so at the time, and I was eventually served with a subpoena for the federal grand jury asking me not only for the videotape but also for my testimony before this sort of secret government court, kind of like a military tribunal, where you don't get an attorney unlike the rest of U.S. court procedures, and there is no judge. It's just the prosecutor, the witness being myself, and the jury. Not being willing to turn over the tape and testify in this environment, I chose to resist and cited journalistic privileges in my constitutional amendments of various sort and color. And at that point, I had a couple more hearings and was eventually dragged from court in my suit and tie and taken to a federal detention center. And I ended up spending 220 days there before coming to a resolution that we had actually put forward back in November saying, all right, I'll publish the material and turn over a copy to you of all my unedited tapes, seeing as there's nothing of a sensitive or controversial nature there, if I don't have to testify. Again, we had put this forward in November, but come the beginning of April, we were finally able to get the U.S. attorney to agree to that resolution.
Right, and from your perspective, what's the lesson here? I mean, what did this kind of come out of nowhere for you? Yeah, I get the sense that you weren't exactly expecting this to happen.
Well, very few people are expecting the FBI to show up at their door. The lesson, first off, from a domestic perspective or U.S. perspective, is that we need a federal shield law. We have various state protections in this country, but in terms of journalistic protections, in the federal context, there is nothing. And in terms of an international sense, obviously we need to ensure that as we make advancements in terms of information laws protect our print press or our professional press, we also need to take in mind that bloggers and other independent internet journalists also need to be afforded those same protections.
Right, and you very much considered yourself, through all of this, an internet journalist, right?
I mean, I go out to gather information and disseminate it to the public. I think that's a journalist.
Right, exactly. And, well, maybe you can talk then, in the wake of this, what are some of the efforts that you feel you and maybe others in the West could make to reach out and let people know that this sort of thing is going on, you know, and talk to other people around the world who are having similar problems?
Yeah, there's a couple things that I started working on. One around information, which has actually been kind of put on the second tier right now because I'm focusing on another project, but that's called the Free the Media Coalition. Because when this all came down, there's all sorts of more standardized protection agencies out there, like Committee to Protect Journalists is an excellent organization and have reached out for some internet journalists. But there's nothing that's really just kind of focused on a peer-to-peer developing a network to engage and protect bloggers and serve as an open-ended resource across the world. And so that's the Free the Media Coalition, which we're going to be developing a site in the next month or two, which will be at mediafreedoms.net. And then something that we're just finally getting launched now is prisonblogs.net. So we have all these situations where bloggers are actually going to prison, and that's a horrible thing. But at the same time, we have this opportunity with blogs to get the stories of the people who are in prison, whether they were already bloggers or not bloggers, to type up what they, or if they have access to a typewriter, type up, or write by hand what they want the world to hear. Like the motto of the organization is every voice deserves to be heard, and we're hoping to have prisoners from around the world hooked up with different sponsors on the outside who will maintain their own blogs for them to really get those stories out. That, I mean, when the government throws someone in jail, it's to silence them, and this sort of turns the mirror back at them.
Josh, thanks a lot for joining us. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. We are going to shift gears just a little bit now and talk about corporate complicity in all of this. Ron Diebert had mentioned something about that, and Kamal had mentioned it too. He brought up big names like Google and Yahoo. Also router companies like Cisco are involved in some of this. And Ron had mentioned some smaller companies too that are involved in this sort of thing, and it's become one of the real interesting threads of this story, I think, to sit there and think about, you know, these companies that go into countries like China, and to a certain extent, when you talk to them about doing business there, they say, hey, we have to follow the laws of the land. Which doesn't always end well for the people in those countries. So I think what we want to do now is turn to, and hopefully we're getting him on the line as we speak, Morten Sklar, who is the executive director of the World Organization for Human Rights, USA. And it's a very interesting story. I'll let Morten tell the bulk of it. He has actually helped the wife of a Chinese cyber dissident who is in jail right now bring a lawsuit here in the States, sorry. I'm still on Boston time. In the States, in San Francisco. And so now I think we have Morten on the line. Morten, are you there?
Yes, we are here.
Okay, great. Are you both there, Morten and Teresa both? Or?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay, great. Teresa Harris is also there. She's also with the World Organization for Human Rights USA. She's the International Justice Project Director. So, Morten, tell me a little bit about what you folks are doing to help Yu Ling, who is the wife of a Chinese cyber dissident.
Yu Ling was the very courageous Chinese woman who brought the attention of the United States and the world to the problem that her husband, Wang Jianing, was facing in China, and also Xi Tao. She came to the United States to file a lawsuit against the Yahoo Corporation, and that's the case that we have filed and that's pending right now. What is unusual about what has happened in China in terms of repression on the Internet is that U.S.-based corporations are playing such a major role in this latest iteration of how the repression of free speech, free press, and free communication rights are taking place by virtue of the control that these corporations exercise over the use of the Internet. In China, Yahoo has provided the government with the names, addresses, and identifying information for individuals using the Internet to exchange information and ideas on democracy, human rights, and the reform of the government. Cisco Systems has provided China with routing equipment, technology, and training to allow them to establish a huge ongoing program to monitor Internet use. And Google has self-censored access by Chinese users to sites that the government of China finds objectionable. Our group, Human Rights USA, last month filed a lawsuit on behalf of Yu Ling, her husband, and Shi Tao in the U.S. Court in California against Yahoo to hold them accountable for their role in this process of repression of the Internet. There are 4 individuals whose names we know, and probably hundreds more whose names we do not know, who have been arbitrarily arrested, detained for long periods, and probably tortured by the government of China because Yahoo gave the Chinese government their Internet user identifying information. Indeed, the Chinese kangaroo courts convicted them of state subversion and the use of state secrets, specifically by citing Yahoo numerous times in their decisions as the source of the information that led to those charges.
Right.
We're waiting now for Yahoo's response to the court, to the lawsuit, but I just want to give you an idea of what we were up against that comes from the statements Yahoo has made to the media. This is what they say. We simply did what we were asked to do and required to do by the Chinese government in order to do business in that country. We can't be expected to know how the Chinese government is going to use the ID information that they've requested, and we didn't really do this ourselves. It was done by a Chinese affiliate that we can't control. That sounds an awful lot to us like the following orders defense that was used by the Nazis during the Holocaust and the Nazi atrocities of World War II, a defense that the international community obviously has totally rejected. The bottom line for Yahoo and the other Internet companies that we're concerned about is that they must be held accountable for their complicity in these abuses. They must ask themselves before any new requests for information are responded to whether it would result in the arbitrary arrest and torture of Internet users who have committed no real crimes, and they must not allow themselves to be complicit in major human rights abuses. We originally hoped that Yu Ling would be here today in this discussion, but she is in China and unable to attend and wasn't able to send any video remarks. So Teresa Harris, the International Justice Director of Human Rights USA and a longtime Amnesty volunteer and supporter, is with us to share a few words from Yu Ling about her case.
Thank you. Yu Ling describes the first time that she saw her husband, Wang Jianing, after his incarceration like this. The first time I was able to see him was after 2004. From September 1st, 2002 to February 18th, 2004, I was not able to see him. After he got into prison, I was able to see him once for about half an hour every month. But the first time I saw him, I remember he looked emaciated and weak, and he kept coughing nonstop. He had no expression whatsoever. He was seeing through me. His eyes were looking through me like it's blank. He's actually very feeble right now, and his hair is all white now, and all of a sudden he looked very old. I'm afraid to think of his situation, because when I think of it, I want to cry. When asked why she filed the lawsuit, Yu Ling explained it this way. Yahoo betrayed my husband, disclosed his personal information, and disclosed his privacy. Yahoo's actions of providing this information caused my husband to be sentenced. If Yahoo did not give out his information, then the Chinese government would not be able to sentence him. The documents for sentencing came to 14 pages, and 9 of them had my husband's email addresses. The name of Yahoo appeared 10 times. Twice, it clearly mentioned that the Yahoo Hong Kong company provided the account information in order for the court to be able to use it as testimony. All of the different pages have Yahoo written all over the place. So it's very prevalent to me that Yahoo is the culprit, and that's why I want to pursue the lawsuit. The only thing my husband did was he thoroughly expressed his opinions on the Internet. Therefore, because Yahoo provided his Internet information, he was convicted. Also, I heard that Yahoo, along with the other Internet giants, had utterly denied the responsibility in these cases. The Yahoo company didn't even say sorry. They think they haven't done anything wrong. So that pushed me to want to come out and tell the truth because I had experienced it firsthand. I hope to be able to have Yahoo promise that in the future they will stop this kind of wrongdoing. That's why I wanted to pursue the lawsuit here in the United States, to get justice back.
Can I ask, what is your guys' sense that this lawsuit can succeed?
I think there's a good chance it can succeed. In the United States, we have special laws that provide for the ability of victims and survivors of torture to be able to obtain compensation from the abusers if they're found in the United States. And of course, here we're dealing with the United States corporation. So I think that the chances are, based on this congressional statute and the extensive case law that's flowed from that statute, gives us a good chance to get a relief against Yahoo.
One of the interesting things that remind me, you're talking, you mentioned the sort of responses that Yahoo gives when asked about this, and I was thinking at the same time about some of Google's responses when they first went into China, and they had a slightly different take on the argument. Their argument was that it's better for us to be there providing some level of service than to not be there at all. And I wonder what you guys think of that argument.
It's certainly true that it is better for them to be there. It's better for Internet access to be available in China. But I think when it reaches the point where a corporation or an individual or a government, for that matter, is in a situation where they are contributing to torture, contributing to arbitrary arrest and long-term detention, a major violation of human rights, then they have to ask themselves the question, is it worth doing this? Is it proper to do this? And that's the problem here, that these corporations that are involved with the Internet in these various countries, especially China, have not asked themselves that question, have not faced up to the fact that they are complicit in major human rights abuses, including torture. And once they realize that, I think they will not take the position that involvement with the government is the better course.
And what do you think ordinary people can do to bring pressure on these companies to make those sorts of things happen?
I think everybody who is aware of the case, first of all, people need to be more aware of these cases and aware of how the Internet is being repressed in such a serious way, that it's the latest mechanism that's being used to promote torture and repression by repressive governments. I think people need to speak out with our government, at least we're talking about the United States citizens, to say, look, you can't allow this to happen. You have to pass a law that our companies doing business abroad cannot be complicit in human rights abuses. And I also hope that Americans and others who hold shares in Yahoo and the other companies' stocks will do something to put pressure on them. There's a shareholders meeting on June 12th in California for Yahoo, and there's a shareholders resolution before that meeting saying that Yahoo should not be allowed to conduct these kinds of practices. That should pass. And all the efforts that can be made to put pressure on Yahoo and the U.S. government to make sure these practices are discontinued, that ought to take place.
Morton and Teresa, thanks a lot. Appreciate you joining us.
Our pleasure.
Before we move into the next segment and we get the next contributor up on the line, maybe I can just kind of ask you guys up here, what do you make of the corporate complicity in this? Sami, you talked a little bit about that in your speech. Is there anything? I mean, is there? Maybe you can talk about legal recourse outside of the United States that might be taken against companies.
I think it is the task of the Western activists to open this front against companies. I guess that activism in the South, in the Middle East, in China, in Africa are taking risk fighting against censorship there and against their authoritarian regime. But here they can do not a lot of things, but I think the media here in the West and activists can speak a lot about that and make campaign, certainly on the internet, against designing such softwares.
Great. Well, I think we do have our next guest. We're going to switch gears a little bit. The next section is called The Power of the Internet, and we want to start with Yan Sham Shackleton, who is originally from Hong Kong, now living in California. She is the author of a weblog called Glutter, which is a combination of glitter and gutter. And Yan, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Maybe you can just start off by talking a little bit about your weblog and a little bit about your experience in China.
Well, I like to. Well, I have two prongs of internet experience. I started out right out of college working as a producer for Hong Kong and China.com, and then working in ISPs in Asia. The internet business because it crashed, and then I worked on my own personal projects, one of which was Glutter. I want to say that I really relate to Sami and his conversation about how he is an ordinary person. It's very much how I feel about me coming to speak out, and how that an ordinary person like myself can get involved in being a censor and taking part in what Yahoo is doing in a smaller scale, blocking and helping governments repress ordinary people as well. When I started in the internet business, I was the producer, as I said earlier on, and I was in charge of writing the news and putting up the news on the website. At the time, it was right after 1997, which is when Hong Kong was handed over to Britain, and there was a lot of discussion about the Basic Law and about the High Court. My friend and I were putting all this news up because we felt it was going into China and we wanted to share the information. Within the company, there was a Mr. I think Zhao, who used to sit in an office, who didn't seem to have any role, but he was sort of overlooking the whole of the operation because he was because China.com was 40 to 60% owned by Xinhua News Agency, which is the news agency, the official news agency of China. One day we were called into the room and was told that we were no longer allowed to put sensitive information up on the net. We were not allowed to discuss anything to do with the Basic Law, politics, or judiciary system. Then June was also coming up, and we had to then put on the chat rooms and message boards blocks for anything relating to political things, legal things, and of course June 4th, Tiananmen Square, massacre, students, democracy. Those were all banned in the message board and chat rooms. And the way we would do it is simply use the swearing word block, and we'll feed all that in, and anyone who types those words, those messages will not come up. I do deeply believe in the fact that governments and normal people in the West must fight against that, because as a young woman, I was simply doing my job. I was asked to do a job. I eventually did quit, but it took 2 months because I had to find a new job. I had to live my life and pay my bills. I was desperately unhappy, but when you're in that situation, you just do what you're told. I understand that it's not an excuse, and that's why I quit the job, and partly why I started Glutter as well.
Well, you raise an interesting point that I want to bring out a little bit more, and that's that this isn't all just done by technical means. I mean, in a case like China, what you're describing there is a very much a government policy then, sent down through media organizations that kind of that kind of definitely reinforces whatever technical filtering is there. Is that sort of an accurate portrayal, would you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's very easy to do because, like, the technology that's been building that seems very innocuous can be used in a censoring way, because mainly they were the original authors of the software was merely blocking swear words, but then you simply plug in. I think it's technology. It's like the human control of technology. And whatever technology we have can simply be used in a negative way.
So what then can you do through your weblog to help speak out against this, do you think?
Well, I simply started writing about democracy in Hong Kong and free speech. And on my 30th birthday, I wrote a piece that said, my 30th birthday wish was a democratic China. It was in English, simplified Chinese, and in traditional Chinese. I went into China for a visit, and I stupidly looked at the blog. This is another experience about how I think they censor. While I was in the internet cafe, they had a young man in a shirt who sat there reading emails and reading sites. And I sort of started talking to the people, and I said, "Oh, do you work for the hotel?" And he laughed and said, "No." And I said, "Are you a visitor?" And he said, "No." And I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I work for the government." And we had a chat, and I left. And the next day I came in, they were very, very cold towards me and would not speak to me and did not want me there. I left to return to Hong Kong. I couldn't get on my blog. I wrote to the American company with a typepad and said, Mike, I can't seem to get on the blog. And they wrote back saying, it seems to be a geographical problem. It's only happening in certain parts of the world. The rest of the world's okay. And then 4 hours later, my blog was banned in China. It was blocked, and the whole of typepad was blocked as well. I didn't really know what to do, and I turned my site black as protest and wrote to my friends, and that ended up being a sort of mini protest where about 100 other sites around the world, 24 countries, turned their site black and reported this blocking. I think when we're in a Western country or a free country, as I was in Hong Kong, because free speech is guaranteed under the mini institution, the best we can do is explain it and spread the word of what is going on and discuss it, because we're the people with the power. Like the former speaker said, we're the people with the stock. We can go to the stockbroker meetings. We can talk to the government and sorry, I'm nervous. And make that happen for the people in repressive regimes, because we can still try and break through the firewall through technical means and teach people how to stay anonymous and safe, because people within the country can't do that. And the truth is, if the internet is truly free, it doesn't matter that the government has control of their media, because the people will have access to the world and different ideas and thoughts and be able to speak out.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, while we get our next guest on the line, I just wanted to get a reaction from up here about what Yan was talking about. And anybody want to relate their experience to what she was talking about? Kevin can.
Well, one of the things I find interesting about China is the infinite creativity of Chinese people to get around this. I remember in 2005 having a Skype chat with Isaac Mao, who's an entrepreneur and net activist in Shanghai, and he said that people would put up characters and messages on Flickr and then just put the pictures up because the Great Firewall was text-based. They would create these chat bots so that if you subscribe to a chat user called, let's say, Garden News, for instance, you could get free and unfiltered news through Skype or through instant messaging services, which is one of the reasons why they block Flickr, why they block instant messaging services, because people are it's a game of cat and mouse. So It's really interesting to see how many different ways people find around, because just as Jan was talking about human uses of technology, so perverting profanity filters to be political filters, users can do it right back at you. So I think that's one of the things that impresses me about China.
Right. Anybody else want to add anything? Nope. Okay. I do think we have our next guest on the line. It's Richard Stallman. Richard, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Richard. Maybe you can just start off by introducing yourself to the folks here.
Well, I'm the founder of the free software movement. In 1983, I reached the conclusion that users of software must have the freedom to study the source code and change it and redistribute the software to others, either with or without changes. Only this way do the users actually control what it does, and only with these freedoms are users allowed to live as part of a community. So the idea of the free software movement is all software should be free. Users should always have these freedoms. I also started developing the GNU operating system in 1984 to try to implement the goal of this movement. And nowadays people mistakenly call it Linux, but it does enable us to use computers and have freedom.
Right. Well, maybe you can, Richard, you can talk a little bit about how you see free software fitting into mitigating internet censorship globally.
Well, free software by itself can't do anything about the use of gateways to block access to sites. But if you're using non-free software, you're vulnerable to a different kind of control, and that is through your own computer. When you use non-free software, that means you're using software controlled by somebody else. Now, that somebody else may be a global megacorporation that doesn't care a tiniest bit about your freedom and finds it useful to control you. So, for instance, both Microsoft Windows and Mac OS are designed to restrict users from copying. Now, this is outrageous in itself, but in order to keep those restrictions from being bypassed, they take advantage of the fact that the users don't have control over the software at all. So we have to protect ourselves from threats both inside and outside. While we fight against the Great Firewall and so on, we also have to make sure that our own computers can't be used to censor. Part of the so-called trusted computing scheme, which I'd rather call treacherous computing, it's a scheme that's been implemented in Windows Vista to redesign computers so that they don't really obey their owners anymore. Instead, they obey various companies. Part of the ideas that were proposed with this was that every document could have a number, and then the company that makes the word processor could broadcast a message to all the computers in the world telling them, don't display document number XYZ ever again. And they won't. And the idea is it would be impossible to write a program capable of displaying that document. Now, this is just perfect for Enron, perfect for dodgy dossiers, and any other sort of government machinations that they don't want people to be able to report on. Imagine if a whistleblower sends a copy of a document to a reporter and the reporter can't view the document. This feature is already being implemented.
Right. Well, then what does the free software movement do then to get the tools you'd like to see out there in the hands of the people who need it?
Well, doing something about this requires probably different hardware. I'm not completely sure. I'm not an expert on how to break these kinds of internal security features. But what is clear is that doing so is likely to be illegal in many countries, the United States and most of Europe. So we can't do this just with software. there are other countries which don't have those laws where maybe it can be done. But what we see is that countries disposed to take away people's freedom make it hard to defend freedom. In the 1960s, when I started getting involved with computers, there were people who said, computers are dangerous, they're going to take over the world. And I said to them, that's silly. You don't know how computers work. They just do what they're programmed to do. They can't rule or control anybody. And although that was right in a literal sense, at a deeper level, I think they were right and I was wrong. Because computers today, in a sense, are taking over the world. Not on their own behalf, of course. They're not sentient. They have no desires. They can't really be the emperor. But they make a great tool for the emperor if the emperor controls what the software does that people use. And computers are making possible today a world of total surveillance that goes far beyond what Orwell ever imagined. This is the agenda of Blyer and Clown, to set up the total surveillance society where nothing that people do can ever be unknown to Big Brother.
Richard, thanks a lot for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Jumped the gun a couple minutes ago. Kevin's already spoken, but we have with us Kevin Anderson, who spent 8 years with the BBC working on blogging strategy. He helped launch a 5 Live radio program on blogs and podcasts. And he was recently lured away from the mothership, as we like to call it, and is now head of blogging and interaction at The Guardian. So welcome, Kevin.
Hi. I'd just like to, in a few moments, kind of give a brief overview about how some of this is changing what we do as journalists. And Clark mentioned the 5 Live program that I helped start up with Chris Valance and Rod Sharp, who are in the audience. And just to give you some concrete examples of how, as Martha said, this breaks borders. Chris told me an anecdote. I think you were covering the Michael Jackson trial in California when your computer rang. And it's Tehran on the line. It was a blogger that he had been in contact with and had a scoop. So it just completely obliterates borders in ways that weren't possible. And that's why things like Skype and now things that allow Skype to break through some of these restrictions are important. Another story that I like to tell is the last year I was at the BBC, I helped launch a program called World Have Your Say. And my job was to find people online who had something to contribute to the program. And occasionally they had challenges for me. I called it make the geek jump through hoops. And so one day they said there was a report that had come out saying there are 10 countries in the world and they're the most informationally restricted. And there was North Korea and Burma, Libya, Tunisia, just to name a few. And my challenge, if I chose to accept it, was to try to get someone on the air from one of those countries. And I said, well, I can go, if you can fly me up to a hill in China, I might be able to get a cell phone call into North Korea. Now, ironically, I had 5 hours to do this, and I looked in blogs, and you know, there were bloggers in some of these countries. I checked Skype directories. And strangely enough, I didn't get anyone on the air, but I managed to, by 4 o'clock, have coffee with a Libyan blogger just across the way from Bush House. And she wouldn't come on air because, very similar to what was said before, she wasn't necessarily worried for her own safety, but she was worried for her family. And she said, the authorities in Libya will know where I come from because they'll pick up my accent and know what tribe I'm from. But she just talked about blogging and how she had started blogging about 3 or 4 years ago. And a funny anecdote. She said to me, I said, well, is it really difficult in Libya? And she's like, oh, no. It's much easier. I mean, you know, it's really difficult in Tunisia. And she talked about going to Tunisia, and she went to an internet cafe, and she logged on. And much as in China, there are monitors in every internet cafe. And she actually had to go to the internet cafe owner and get his permission to print out an email. And the internet cafe person actually read her personal email before handing over the document. So, it just kind of is amazing that those limitations, it still is very easy there are people who have the technical skills and who have the drive to get around them. Another example in how, and just in closing, how this breaks barriers and allows journalists to tell stories that would have been very difficult. I've got a few contacts in the Egyptian blogosphere, which is a very interesting place online. And one of them, and just to say this isn't just the internet, one of them sent me a text message when I was out walking in the countryside a year ago, letting me know that Ala Abdel Fattah had been detained by the Egyptian authorities. And he was one of 40 Egyptians who were protesting for an independent judiciary. And we were able to get his wife on the air the very next night to discuss his detention. And Ala continued to blog by passing notes out of the prison, very much as Josh Wolf was talking about, and showing sort of what the prison conditions looked like. I was online last December, and my blogging contact popped up and said, "Oh, have you seen this video on YouTube?" And I said, "No." And I'm glad I hadn't eaten recently, because it was a terrifying video. And what it was Egyptian authorities who had detained a minicab driver in a Cairo neighborhood and had taken camera phone video of an assault, some would say torture, of this minicab driver. The Egyptian police in that area were actually passing the video around via Bluetooth to other people in the community to intimidate them. So two bloggers took the video and posted it on YouTube, and there are many ironies, and I don't need to embellish them, and what had been used as an intimidation method suddenly, through the power of YouTube and blogs, was something that the whole world could watch. So I think, this just shows what the internet is doing, and from, my computer here in London, I can be plugged into a lot of people, trying to get information out, trying to express themselves, and trying to just basically exercise their basic rights. And so it is, the internet's an amazingly important leveling feature that we have.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. Okay. Of course, there are a lot of people working very hard on technical ways to get around this kind of content filtering. One of the more interesting projects is something called Tor, which stands for the Onion Router. And we have Shava Nerad on the line, who is the executive director. Shava, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Shava. Could you just tell us a little bit about Tor?
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I just wanted to say we've come a long way from writing postcards after church for prisoners of conscience in the 60s, which was my first involvement with Amnesty. But here, 4 decades later, I'm executive director of the Tor Project. We're in the Boston area in the U.S., a tiny R&D and educational nonprofit, an NGO here in the U.S. We only have a few staff, but something over 1,000 volunteers worldwide who run servers, translate web pages, and write code for our open source anonymity and circumvention network. And our software is recommended by Reporters Without Borders and Global Voices Online, and used by Human Rights Watch and many other human rights groups, and hundreds of thousands of users worldwide to get around circumvention, to do circumvention of national firewalls. What I'd like to talk about, perhaps a little bit more than technical issues, are the tension between the technical issues and the social issues. And I'd like to open with a quote from Kofi Annan from a couple of years ago, oddly enough in Tunisia, where he said, "And of course, the information society's very lifeblood is freedom. It is freedom that enables citizens everywhere to benefit from knowledge, journalists to do their essential work, and citizens to hold government accountable. Without openness, without the right to seek, to receive, and impart information and ideas through any media, and regardless of frontiers, the information revolution will stall, and the information society we hope to build will be stillborn." Now, when I was a kid in a little town in northern Vermont here in the U.S., I grew up in the whole world. It wasn't that common for children in the U.S. to know much about international affairs. My parents got the local newspaper, the Christian Science Monitor, then the best U.S. newspaper for international affairs. And sometimes when money was not so tight, we got the Guardian actually by slow boat about 3 weeks late. But today, online, I can check the Guardian site before I go to bed. It's amazing. I listen to American National Public Radio or the BBC World News Service on the radio much of the day as I work. But if you're in China, NPR.org is blocked. And even the NPR correspondents in China have to use our software to file their stories to the U.S. through Tor to get around the firewall. Circumvention tools such as the Tor Project's Tor Network or Ron Diebert's Citizens Lab's Siphon and other tools and systems can sidestep filtering and national firewalls. But in a way, we're engaged in an information arms race between powerhouses like China and the corporations that assist them, and tiny nonprofits and academic groups such as Ron's and my own. It's the power of the Internet that makes this struggle even possible. But we need your help in that struggle. People need to educate themselves. You need to educate others, act as you can, and help us make privacy online a norm in the face of governmental and marketing pressures. It's public silence on these issues that makes the silencing of online speech possible. Only our own speech against censorship can solve a problem, which is ultimately social and political, not technical. You can and might want to use these tools too, regardless of what you're doing online. Our client, Tor, is used by dissidents, bloggers, journalists, human rights workers, whistleblowers, activists, as well as law enforcement, military, security, businesses, various governmental agencies all over the world. But we're also being used by ordinary people to avoid unscrupulous marketing and malware risks. I know a lawyer here in the U.S. who has intelligent things to say about local politics, but all of his law partners and half of his clients might well take umbrage at what he has to say. So he uses Tor to separate his personal identity as a pseudonymous blogger, blogging under a pseudonym, from his professional identity in his community. The ordinary uses of Internet privacy should be important to every one of us. We should be thinking about the risks not only of censorship in China, but also our consumer rights online and the future of political speech online in every country. We should be worried about the privacy and financial security risks of data retention. We need to self-educate. It's through the power of educating ourselves on the social issues and the technical issues that we will have a strong voice with our own communities, our governments, and in the world. The resistance to Internet censorship may be one of the largest stealthy nonviolent actions in the world today. Net neutrality is resisted in the U.S., data retention in Europe, bloggers' rights in so many countries. The right to free expression online is the backbone of the resistance of arbitrary controls by governments who are not agile enough to adjust to the accelerating rate of change in world events, in human relations, facilitated by boundaryless communications on the web. The elephant in the room is sovereignty. Kamal Ahmed from The Observer talked about the governmental reactions to dissidents, but so much of the controversy over these issues is presented from our point of view as human rights, the right to free speech, free expression, and from the other side as an issue of sovereignty. We need to understand how to speak to that. Martha Lane Fox identified this as disruption. Whether you believe this is a good thing or a bad thing probably entirely depends on your investment, your hopes, and your fears. I like to think of this as being the Galileo problem. Galileo is often lauded as a hero of free expression in the sciences, but what even scientists often forget is that the Vatican didn't try to suppress him because his ideas were invalid, but because they felt that the speed of information, and that was a relative singularity in the Renaissance, was disruptive to society. They wanted more time to spin the information for the masses, so to speak. Well, today, some of the players in our current drama deserve some of our compassion also. China, as our largest example, is in flux. I often end up talking to reporters who try to make me vilify the Chinese, and I certainly can't approve of any number of things that happen in China. But ruling China has always seemed to me an impossible task, and ruling China through the kind of change they're embracing now is some multiplier of impossible. China moving to a market economy is a pressure cooker. It's producing economic, environmental, and human rights pressures that can't be estimated because they're such rapidly moving targets. So rather than opposing China, I think of our disruptive technologies as, in a special way, being the valve on the pressure cooker. We want evolution, not revolution. We want reconciliation and nonviolent change. None of us want to see China in civil unrest. The consequences to the whole world would be devastating. Does China actually think the Internet is a bad thing? Any country who thought the Internet was a bad thing would simply not allow the Internet at all. China needs the Internet. They need the swift exchange of information to remain competitive. So the solution of so many of these countries who Karim Amar documents as jailing people for online activity is to allow the net and then to try to control it by social controls, some technical solutions like filters, but often enough amorphously broadly phrased laws or the applications of existing laws that allow them to jail almost anyone at will. This is not a new problem. Dissidents have been entrapped by capriciously enforced information-related laws for centuries. Pamphleting led to my own country's separation from Britain, speaking in union halls. East German neighbors reported for wrong thoughts. Fax machines at Tiananmen. Without anonymous pamphleting, it's likely I'd be a subject of the Queen today. But no one could repress the authors of some of our prophets of free speech in the American colonies. Anonymity online, similarly, is vital to free expression online. John Gilmore from the Electronic Frontier Foundation is often quoted, "The net interprets censorship as damage and routes around it." And that's the soul of circumvention. But the net was also designed technically to trace information, and the tension between those two features is where we find cultural tensions. The Internet leaves tracks. Like caller ID, your Internet activity leaves an address that tracks your online activity like a travel itinerary. Without tools like Tor, your government or some slimy marketing company can trace your activity from website to website, forum posts, email. The Internet that we praise for making such excellent communications possible also makes forensics easy for those who would wish us ill. Circumvention gets around firewalls, but anonymity means that if circumvention is detected, the person at the end of the line is still reasonably protected. Anonymity is important to those journalists, dissidents, and human rights workers, whistleblowers, union activists, reformers, but if only these sensitive populations use anonymity to protect their activities, then governments can identify them specifically for their use of anonymity and circumvention tools. This actually keeps a democracy blogger in China safer than a political blogger in Tunisia, because in China, thousands and thousands of Chinese are circumventing the Great Firewall at any second, giving cover to those who might be at risk. In Tunisia, usage is low in general, and circumvention is rare. Should the authorities be able to slit your email without cause, to track your web surfing without a warrant, to prevent you to have access to the tools that would allow your privacy? Until the privacy of online information is accepted in every country, at least on par with the privacy of mail or phone communications, and it's protected, we won't have an information society such as Kofi Annan envisioned in my opening quote. We'll just have speech on steroids, and there will be so much information that the silencing of some part of it could become invisible. So take these messages away from here, spread them, talk to people broadly online and personally one-on-one. Understand the arguments, support these organizations, and get your friends to support them too. We must become the common wisdom of the information society we want to see emerge. Thank you.
Chava, thanks. All right, we want to open the floor up for debate and discussion at this point. We have a couple of people with microphones moving about the room. We ask that if I call on you, if you would please stand up. If you would also wait for the microphone to get to you so that everybody on the webcast can actually hear your question. And try to speak clearly, please. Thanks. Anybody want to kick it off for us? Right there. This gentleman right here on the right. Yep, yep.
Hi there. I'd just like to ask the panel whether they think the technological arms race can be won, because as Richard Stallman implied, there's a similar kind of technological arms race going on with copy protection against freedom to copy and fair use and everything, and whether you think that this is something that can be won only in terms of the kind of whether circumvention software can eventually overcome censorship software, or whether there is also a kind of a necessary kind of social and political element to it as well.
Anybody want to tackle that? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think that the technological solution will solve the problem. I believe that it is a political and social problem. And what we're going to do with a country like Thailand, which is now passing a law that will punish everybody who is using proxifying tool for 5-year prison. And the parliament is now discussing that in Thailand. So other countries, I guess, that are trying to punish everyone who is having the courage to use bypassing and proxifying tools. So I think raising awareness among citizens inside countries like China, Tunisia, the Middle East, Africa about the right to freedom of speech is the main cause.
Sina?
In all the cases I know in Iran, when the people, bloggers, internet activists were arrested, none of them I can remember that they were traced by technology. The people were arrested, interrogated, and it led to another person to be arrested. So I don't think technology solutions will solve the problem without any social and political elements. And another reason for my belief is, the Iranian people, they cannot obtain many new technologies because of the sanctions, the US sanctions, but the government itself, because of its financial power, it can obtain the newest technology in the black market. And they can always be one step ahead of the ordinary users and average users. So I don't think the technology itself, without any social and political element, can be this solution.
Next question. How about over in the corner? Actually, I was the lady in front. Yes, please.
Hi, I was just wondering, do you think in the mainstream media, I imagine around the world, and particularly in the West, a lot is talked about China being the big villain of internet censorship, and do you think that actually too much emphasis is put on China to the detriment of people finding out about other areas?
It's interesting. I mean, one of the early programs we did with World Have Your Say was about censorship in China, and unbeknownst to us, because we didn't have any native speakers of Chinese on the team, we sort of stepped in the middle of kind of a blog storm of people saying in China, won't the West just stop banging on about censorship? There's lots of stuff going on here. And there are a lot of people in China who, it's the best thing they've ever had, so comparatively speaking to no speech, they're happy to have it as long as they operate within some prescribed areas. So they know that politics, they're bulletin, don't go there. And I did an interview with a Chinese cyber dissident at my desk using Skype, and he said to me, he's like, actually, the number of people, internet users in China who are very upset about the censorship, upset about the controls, actually is a small percentage of users in China. So I think that there is a more balanced story to be told about what's happening in China, and that there's a lot of people and a lot of internet entrepreneurs who constantly say, well, you always talk about censorship, you never talk about the cool Web 2.0 stuff we do. So I think there is a more complicated, nuanced story to be told.
We actually, if I can just throw in some personal experience, we tried, we've done a lot of stuff on China on the show, and we actually had a correspondent go there, and he said, I really want to do a story on blogging. And I said, yeah, sure, go ahead. Why not? So he came back with a story, and we ran it. And, he was trying to draw out a story and talk to one of these, I guess you'd call him a cyber dissident, although I don't think he'd qualify himself as that. And he just didn't want to talk about it for the obvious reasons, because he was afraid for his family. He was afraid he'd get thrown in jail. And so the quote that we ended up using was a 10-second clip of him saying, I don't really have any comment about that. Okay, so our correspondent does a 20-minute interview with the guy, and we run a 10-second clip of him saying that. And the blogosphere ate us alive. And it was for that particular reason. It's like we failed to point out that A, that people are afraid and that's why they don't talk, but B, there are all these other people for whom this is not an issue. He doesn't blog about anything that the government finds that offensive, so he does that for a reason. He does that so that they don't come down on him. That's just some experience that we've had with doing that story. Next question, yes, sir.
I myself managed an ISP and a portal in Pakistan. It was a regular, normal routine that we used to get a list of all the sites that we had to log, we had to block. There's no, it was not documented. We don't do it. I would have just been, disappeared or arrested for another, under another crime. What do you think if all the sites which are actually blocked by a country are regularly displayed? I think that is like name and shame kind of a thing. And if I know the kind of people that are there from that part of the world, they do find ways to get onto that. So it would actually be counterproductive for the governments to actually block that.
Was there a response to that, or?
I know many Iranian bloggers tried that tactic to name and shame ISPs who are actively blocking websites. Actually, today there was a story in Iranian media about a national-wide filtering system. And I personally think it's better than every ISP be responsible for filtering, because the owner of ISP, he's a businessman, he's afraid of the government, he wants to keep his business, and they are more conservative than the bureaucracy itself. But we must consider this, that the owners and the managers of ISPs are also under the same repression and, like bloggers and online activists. 1 year after I was arrested, it was 4 years ago, the government not only arrested some of online journalists of a reformist website, but they also arrested all the staff of an ISP which registered the domain of that website and give hosting service to that website. And at the time, the ISP thought that they are doing a very justified business, nothing against the law, because the editor of the website was former former deputy minister of state, home office in Iran. And they had a business with them during the reform movement, and then they were arrested. And their only crime was giving normal service to these people. So I know, personally, if I had an ISP, I was not happy to be in this cooperation with the government to block and censor, and probably I would stop my business. But I can understand that these people are also victims of this censorship, not agents of it.
Right. Next question, over here, in the front.
Thank you.
Stand up, please. Thanks.
We heard earlier that Amnesty started early with writing letters back in the 60s, and I know from my group up in North London that they very much still do that and love doing that. And I guess we could do it for when it concerns the internet, and sends both letters and emails, where it could constitute spam, I suppose. But I'm just wondering what would be the panel's view as to how best Amnesty can go forward with this cause. It started raising awareness and has been, I think, quite successful in that. But what would be the action plan, if you want, for you going forwards? How can we be successful in tackling these problems?
Sam?
Yeah, about repressible info. Are you talking about the repressibleinfo.org or? What I think about the NGOs in general, Amnesty and Reporters Without Borders and Human Rights Watch, that there is a lack of using multimedia content. And I guess bloggers and web community individuals are much more creative than NGOs who are powerful they get money, but they are not using really video. They are not using. It is actually maybe the first time that we are witnessing Amnesty International using the real social web in advocacy. And I hope that other NGOs will follow this step and use more multimedia content.
Anybody else? Kevin?
Well, Josh talked about a project that he was working with about prisoners sending out messages and then sort of proxy blogging. And for people in China who do want to talk about political things, there have been a couple of campaigns. I remember Isaac talked about a couple of years ago, Adopt a Chinese Blogger. And so, you would get a message and then you would post that externally to get the message out. So I think that there's wonderful ways to get around this. I think the other thing that is really important, and we've heard it again and again and again, is just education about some of these tools and ways. And I mean, I think it's Reporters Without Borders and maybe Global Voices did the guidebook for bloggers about how to get around these things. So just raising awareness and also if you are a developer, and I don't count myself in those esteemed ranks, but making the tools slightly easier, because I've tried to use some of these tools and I'm sort of smarter than the average blogger, but still somewhat beyond me. So I think educating about the tools and making them a little bit more user-friendly so you don't have to be a Linux expert to use them would be great.
Yes, right here.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I run an organisation that trains marginalised groups here in the UK to use social media. We've worked in prisons, we've worked with refugees, and in my experience, most people who produce blogs and podcasts, especially the ones that are widely read and listened to, are from the same demographic that run the mainstream media. And I wanted to know, do you think that there's a danger that that becomes a trend? I.e., we have people who are quite eloquent and educated and already represented to a certain extent to begin with, who are sort of dominating the blogosphere.
I've got a few opinions about this. I think one of the things is don't mistake what voices are amplified from the blogosphere that reach the mainstream media. So the thing is, I mean, made this great point here about the average voice, and unfortunately we're not hearing a lot of that in media. We hear a lot of dismissive things about the digitally stained wretches and just kind of writing online. And I think one thing that would be really useful is to get that wider range of voices online. The other thing is, because of some of the presentations of the blogosphere in the media, you get this sense that there is a blogosphere, that it is this monolithic thing, and actually there are hundreds of thousands of blogospheres in the world. People who are niche interests, people who speak different languages, people from various strata in society. So I think some of that I would challenge as actually a media presentation of bloggers and what they're doing. I think what is important and what could be really important is to actually have groups that amplify some of those voices that aren't getting, I mean, Global Voices is a great example of amplifying voices that probably wouldn't make it to the mainstream media otherwise, and making people aware of this richness of the voice of the average user.
I think this is correct about the distorted vision of the blogosphere in mainstream media. For example, the only time in English language media, you will hear about Iranian blogosphere is in the time of Iranian election or nuclear crisis. And so if I'm a reporter and I want to write a report about this subject, I will not go to a blog, somebody writes about fashion, or another blog, somebody writes about his issues in personal life. I'm going to the political weblogs, to the weblogs who are active on the current affairs and things like that. And that's why if you get your information from English language media, you think the Iranian blogosphere is all totally political, which is not. And in the case of Iran, in the blogosphere, I think the audience of blogs are different than mainstream media. The audiences of blogs are more younger generation, more educated, because they have the knowledge to use internet, and the combination of these two, the distorted image of blogosphere and the different demographics, led many observers to mistake us. So, for example, in the time of the last election, if you observed the blogosphere and if you read the reports about the blogosphere, you thought that all the Iranian bloggers are either supporting reformist candidate or they want to boycott the election. But actually in the election, more than 50% of the people, they voted, and at the second round, the majority voted for the conservative candidate. So the blogosphere, the image of blogosphere in the mainstream media is not representative of the blogosphere itself, and the blogosphere itself is not representative of the society.
If I may add something.
No, go ahead, of course.
I think that the blogosphere is really changing the face of the mainstream media. In 2003 and 2002, the first wave of the blogger, if I may speak about the Middle East and North Africa, there were liberals who speak English and who did study it in England or in the United States, and there were what we call bridge blogger. They are blogging in English, they are telling the story happening in their country to the Western media. Now we are witnessing another wave of blogging in Farsi, in Arabic, in Swahili. Bloggers are really disconnected from the Western media and blogging about their life. And this new wave is really changing the face of the media. We are witnessing how the Muslim Brotherhood, the conservative party in Egypt, massively using blogs to change the political agenda of Egypt. And that's really pretty new. And the same thing in Tunisia, in Algeria, in Morocco. There are not any more liberal blogger people who believe in the values of the West. They are really rooted in the local area of the Arab and the Middle East.
Yes, down here in the front row.
Jemima Kish, sorry.
That's okay.
Jemima Kish from Media Guardian. I just wanted to ask what we know about the censorship of social networking sites, because obviously they do include blogs, but they're also an incredibly complex way for people to network and communicate and share information.
That's a good question. Anybody, Kevin, do you know anything about that?
Well, again, I mean, the arms race, if you will, is that whenever authorities find that Internet users in a country are using a different service, so when they notice that messages were being passed around in Flickr in China, suddenly Flickr gets censored and shut down. It's been a pretty constant thread that if then a social networking site starts up and it's being used for communication of political messages, it gets censored or shut down quite quickly. So it's been one of these, it is part of the cat and mouse game between authorities who control the internet and the services that come out. So maybe initially they didn't know about Facebook or Bebo or something like that, but as soon as that becomes a place for political speech, it joins the blacklist.
And like was said earlier, that's even extending now to text messaging and things, you know, other sorts of devices. It's not just the computer anymore. I think we have probably time for one more question. You, sir? Wait for the microphone, please. Thanks.
Bruce, author of the 1994 UK School Internet Primer, co-author, and that's far too long ago for this to be a plug. The One Laptop Per Child project is very dear to the heart of quite a few educators. I'm a retired teacher. And I'm wondering if the collective wisdom here this evening and around the world is able to foresee problems for the One Laptop Per Child project, which, as you were saying, when every child becomes a blogger, is going to be yet another wave in the advancing of the internet. Can you foresee any problems? Is there any way of working around them and heading them off at the pass? Thank you.
No idea?
I mean, just trying to think about what the One Lap Per Child, I mean, some of it works on mesh networking, so it'll have a little bit more porous way to get around some of these restrictions, but I can't, I mean, in the countries that would be using them, let's take Ethiopia, for instance, as a country that might use those laptops. The government, I can't see them letting an open platform into their system. So, for instance, Skype in China, for a while you could get Western versions of Skype, but then as it became more prevalent, they actually pass around a Chinese-specific version of Skype that has filters and a backdoor into it. So, again, I have to say that historically there's nothing that lead me to believe that authorities are going to let something in that loosens up their control. However, I just got done reading a book by Neil Stephenson called Diamond Age, and in it has a subversive primer. And so what I'm hoping, as someone who is part of the global geek community, is that some of these kids will grow up into hacktivists and able to turn the one laptop per child as a way to punch holes through the firewall. So I guess there's always hope. And, and that education of users, if you can get them while they're young, they'll be much better at doing stuff that I can't do.
I mean, I think if I can just add, I think one of the other issues you're looking at there is they have the laptop, but are they going to be given internet access, period? First of all, it's brutally hard to get internet access out to some of these places that they want to put these laptops. And secondly, even if they wanted to get it out there and could technically get it out there, is the government going to let them get it out there? I think that's going to be a huge issue. And I think the other issue that you're going to see, not to paint this in terms of like a battle, which one is going to win, because it's going to be a mix, but there's a significant community out there that's saying, whoa, 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 whoa. We got everything we need with our cell phone. Why do you need to make this special laptop? Why don't we try to do things using mobile phones, which have places like Africa much better coverage right now than the internet does. Much better penetration of the internet. So I think you're going to see a nice little stories develop around. They're trying to get the one laptop per child out there. They're also trying to get cell phones out there, and let's hope that through both of those means, people are given the opportunity to get online and view what they want to view and say what they want to say. So I think now I'm going to turn it over to Nick Dearden. Nick, there he's coming from this side. He fooled me. Nick is. Go ahead, Nick.
I'm going to be really quick because people, at least in the theatre, haven't been to the toilet for 2 hours. Maybe you're doing the same at home in solidarity. But basically to say, we wanted to put this event on tonight to celebrate the launch of Irrepressible a year ago. And this is obviously because we're very concerned about the threat that's posed by this virus of repression that we've been hearing about tonight, which is spreading right across the world. But at the same time, I think we're very optimistic in this campaign, and we're optimistic about the potential of the internet to promote human rights, but more widely to affect real social and political change, about making people aware of this potential and of their rights online, and ultimately about celebrating the irrepressible desire of human beings to say what they want to say and to express their thoughts and beliefs freely. And I think that's really testified to very, very strongly and movingly by those people who are in prison today in China, Egypt, Vietnam, Iran, Tunisia, and other countries, and to whom I'm sure we all show our support and solidarity tonight. The problem for us now is making that felt at a political level, and often that means here in the West. We have a process of developing global governance on the internet in the guise of the Internet Governance Forum, but frankly, governments are still centred almost entirely on issues which are very easy for them, like extending control over child pornography, like cybercrime, like security issues. And of course those issues are important to tackle. But unless you base internet governance on freedom of expression, on human rights, on the right to information and privacy, then this governance system is going to make things worse rather than better. And exactly the same with business. We heard earlier from Morten about corporate complicity. Why is this happening? Because companies are scrambling to expand their markets as internet access rapidly spreads and to collect more and more private data on individuals, so that, I'm going to paraphrase Eric Schmidt a few weeks ago, we can tell people what their next job is going to be and what they're going to do at the weekend. And again, I mean, this is worrying for many of us, but again, freedom of expression is coming a really poor second or third or fourth place to these desires. So what happens next, really, what the internet's going to look like in 20 years is up to us. And in the few minutes that's left of this meeting, I'm just going to show you our contribution at Amnesty to that and unveil the new, there it is, the new irrepressible.info look. Now, what you're still going to be able to do on Irrepressible is sign the petition, of course. What you're still going to be able to do is download onto your website or blog fragments of censored material and thereby allow information which is being illegitimately suppressed somewhere in the world to be streamed through your site. In other words, using the power of the internet to overcome those who would like to curtail its power. And if you've not done that yet, I'd love you to do so. But what's new about the site is this news hub here, where you can go and find news on internet censorship anywhere in the world, good or bad, and bring it to this central news hub on the site, which will give a snapshot at any one time of what's happening in the world on internet repression. And again, you can build, if you know enough about how to do it, you can build that element into your own blog or website. In other words, spreading information about internet repression and censorship, which is essential. The spread of information is essential to freedom of expression and free speech. And in this way, we hope that Amnesty is playing a small role in inspiring and enthusing web users around the world to get active in protecting and promoting freedom of expression. For others, of course for people like Xi Tao in prison, but also if we want to continue enjoying the internet the way that we enjoy it now for ourselves as well. So it's an enormous thank you, really, to everybody who's made it possible for us to do this. There have been a few technical glitches, but overall, we have been broadcast to the world, because I've been watching it outside as well. And so a huge thank you to the speakers for making such an effort, both those overseas and those here. Thank you, of course, to The Observer, who sponsored the event, and all of those who've helped us to promote it. And the staff and volunteers here, really too many to mention, who've taken time out from their schedule. And just to mention one person who you'll all be familiar with in this room, who you'll have got your invite from, which is Paul, who spent most of the last month making all of this happen tonight. Thank you to you, of course, for coming, for not going to the toilet for 2 hours, and of course for the work that almost all of you I know are involved in trying to protect and promote freedom of expression in cyberspace. And last but not least, thanks to people who've watched this all over the world and who'll continue to watch it, hopefully, because it will be recorded and